Hello, I'm Father Jeffrey Brooke, and I'm back with another edition of Brick by Brick with Father Brooke. This episode's question: how do I talk to my children about the relationship between the church and the state? How do I talk to my children about the relationship between church and politics? I want to be very clear. In discussing this question today, my goal is not to get into the particulars, the nitty-gritty of any one specific political issue that is facing our country or our world today. Certainly we could maybe do future episodes about some of those topics if you all would like. Today I want to talk about the big picture, the sort of superstructure of the relationship between the church and the state, between the church and politics. And I want to do that in both a vertical and then a horizontal manner. Vertically, I mean that to look through history. Christ was born during the Roman Empire. He died at the hands of Pontius Pilate, a political leader in the Roman Empire. The church began with the stories of the apostles and the early preaching of the church, and it grows and grows despite persecution in the Roman Empire until it is finally legally recognized in 313 AD. And then we know after that the Roman Empire fell, but the church was still around. And then the monarchies rose during the Middle Ages, the kings and the queens of the different countries and places, kingdoms. And eventually they too have now fallen, and the church still remains. Then we have the rise of the modern city-state, and with the birth of that, some declared that the church would fall and be no longer needed in the world today. The church is still here and working in different degrees alongside in this current context of these modern city-states. And then, of course, we know that even since that, we've had the birth of communism, which in some cases very actively sought out to persecute the church once more and her believers. And they too have fallen. And the church is still here to tell the story. And my point in telling all this is that we could look at this historical lens or this historical track and see that the church has existed in a variety of different political and societal frameworks or structures. And that leads us to the horizontal realm, which is that not only is that true historically speaking, that the church remains in all these different types of governments and societal superstructures and politics, it's also true today. The Vatican City-State, the Holy See, maintains diplomatic relationships with 193 countries. And we know right off the bat that those 193 countries do not all share the exact same political structure and dynamic. Not all of them are like the United States in the sense that they're not all two-party democratic governments. They're just not. That's just facts. And yet the church still finds ways to manage to proclaim the gospel and to work towards the building up of the kingdom of God in all those different places. And obviously there's lots of different nuances involved, but my point today is simply that the church manages to continue in all those contexts. And that allows us to bring us to a situation in the United States. Because I think that often as Americans, we fall into this trap, regardless of one's political affiliation. I think I see this on both sides of the spectrum, of beginning to read the Gospels or read the statements of Pope Francis or any church document from throughout the church's history or any statement by our U.S. bishops through a very decidedly political lens. In other words, we begin to read these statements, we approach our faith, we approach the teachings of the church as either a Democrat or a Republican. And then we allow our politics to dictate how we interpret and read what the church has to offer, the truths that the church has passed on through the centuries, the words of Christ. We allow, rather, our particular 21st century politics to dictate how we read these eternal truths. And I think that we really have to be careful in how we do that. So often someone will say, when the church agrees with their particular political party, yes, the church needs to stand up, and there's outcries that the church isn't saying enough, and the church needs to say more, and the leaders need to be on the front lines proclaiming and speaking out for justice. But then when the church's teachings don't align with their political party, you hear the opposite. Oh, The church has no right to talk about that. Be quiet. The church shouldn't be speaking in our society today on those issues. The church has no business talking about that whatsoever. So the question for us now, to get this back to the parents, the parenting that this Peanut Butter and Grace ministry is all about, is how am I approaching the world? And how am I then talking about these things to my children? Because certainly that will influence how they then see the world and see these different societal issues that are going on. So we can kind of have an examination of conscience. Do I read the gospel and the church documents by putting on figurative glasses of the Republican or Democratic Party? Or whatever my political persuasion might be? Or do rather I look at the world with the eyes of faith, looking to see how it is that I can contribute, along with the church, to the building up of the kingdom of God and the just society in the world, as Christ commands us to do so, not as how my political party prefers that I do so. Lastly, the brick. Again, by doing the examination of conscience, of how it is you're approaching the world and the scriptures and the church, that will then influence, of course, how it is you speak to your children about these issues. But also, a little activity that you might consider with your children as the brick for this month is to take turn, have everyone in the family pick out a different country. Maybe you get out a globe and spin it around and then everyone sticks their finger on it. Or maybe you get out a map and put on a blindfold and pick a country. And then have, obviously this is to the degree of the age of your particular children, do some research and learn about the political structure or type of government, how the different branches and functions of government are carried out, how voting works in those different countries. And then also do a little research about the life of the church or the history of the church in those countries. Is it a country where the church is thriving, or is it a country where the church is struggling? Is it a country where there's persecution going on, or where there's freedom of religion? All these different kind of things you can kind of ask and then get together and discuss, like I said, to the degree that your particular age of your child allows you to do this kind of work. But then you can hopefully help your child to see the bigger picture, to recognize that our country is just one among many. Obviously, she's a great nation and has a great responsibility on the world level. However, that the church has existed throughout history in a variety of different contexts and still to this day also continues to thrive in a variety of political dynamics and societal structures. So that's the end of this Brick by Brick with Father Brooke. If you have any more questions, please don't be afraid to ask.